What is the one thing that humanity needs the most? Is it love? Is it, I don't know, understanding, tolerance, maybe rationality, objectivity? Well, yes, all of those are definitely needed. But there's something else that we need more. Something that's stuck permanently at the top of our list of priorities. And that something is work. We need all the work, all the time. Work makes the world go round. And there's nothing better at providing that work than a diesel engine. You may think of diesel engines as mundane, less exciting, less flamboyant than rev-happy, sporty gasoline engines, like comparing a purebred racehorse and a workhorse. But the fact is that gasoline engines are replaceable. Diesel engines are not. They're the atlas that holds our world together. And I will prove that with numbers. In this video, I will show that none of the propulsion technologies and fuels, alternative fuels, or any kind of fuels available currently to humanity are capable of replacing diesel engines and diesel fuel. Nothing comes close because the combination of diesel engine anatomy and diesel fuel creates what is very close to magic in terms of the capacity to deliver work. If you observe this miniature 16cc diesel engine in front of me, you will notice a complete absence of any kind of electrical components or cables. That tells us that we do not have spark plugs. We do not need spark plugs to ignite the air-fuel mixture. It is the mechanical motion of the piston of this engine that is actually igniting the air and fuel. What the motion of the piston does inside a diesel engine is that it's compressing the air inside the cylinder, and it's compressing the air a lot. This is a miniature 16cc single-cylinder model diesel engine, and I have, as you can see, a giant flywheel for leverage. But watch how much force it's needed to compress the air. Like, if I try with one finger, no way. 2 fingers? Let's try 3. Okay, 3 fingers. In fact, there's so much compression that if I let go somewhere around peak compression, there's enough energy to spin the engine almost an entire rotation in the other direction. You need a lot of force to compress the air because a diesel engine has what's known as a very high compression ratio. You can think of a compression ratio simply as how much you squeeze something. The higher the compression ratio, the more you squeeze the air. The more you squeeze the air, the hotter it gets. And at the peak of that squeezing, the air gets so hot that if we were to add the fuel to spray it into that hot air, the fuel would ignite almost instantly. That's why diesel engines must have a very high compression ratio to squeeze the air a lot so that they can ignite the diesel fuel. Of course, when you squeeze something a lot, your tools are getting closer to the center of that energy of the combustion when it starts. Now, instead of my hands, just imagine a piston. The higher the compression ratio, the closer the piston to the center of the combustion, to the source of the energy, and the closer it is to the source of the energy, the more of that energy will be transferred onto the piston, and the more useful work we will get out of the combustion. So why don't gasoline engines then do compression ignition if it's more efficient? They don't because they can't. If we increase the compression ratio of a gasoline engine too much, the engine starts knocking and it self-destructs. Something else that a gasoline engine cannot do is run a heterogeneous air-fuel mixture. It can only run a homogeneous air-fuel mixture, which means that we have the air and fuel equally mixed throughout the cylinder. In other words, if we take two samples of equal volume from two totally different parts of the cylinder, we should have an equal number of air and fuel particles in both of these samples. This sounds very neat and tidy, but it's actually inefficient. Because not only do we have to worry about properly mixing the air and fuel, but we also have to use enough fuel to cover the entire cylinder. This is what gasoline engines have to do, but diesel engines don't. They can run a heterogeneous air-fuel mixture, which means that they can have a totally different concentration of fuel in different parts of the cylinder. They can have an increased concentration of fuel right around the top of the combustion chamber where combustion is supposed to happen, and then they can have a complete absence of fuel in other parts of the cylinder. The final result is that diesel engines do more work than gasoline engines while at the same time spending less fuel. And then there's the diesel fuel itself. It's very energy dense, both per unit of volume and per unit of mass. 1 liter of diesel fuel contains 37.7 megajoules of energy, whereas 1 kilogram of diesel fuel contains 45.5 megajoules of energy. These two figures differ because diesel is less dense than water. 1 liter of diesel doesn't weigh 1 kilogram. It weighs 0.8 kilograms. But despite this reduced density, diesel is an energy monster. Here's a little analogy to put into perspective what 45.5 megajoules of energy can do. It takes 334.4 kilojoules of energy to boil 1 liter of water, to bring it from 20 to 100 degrees Celsius. Just 1 kilogram of diesel fuel can boil 136 liters of water. It is precisely this combination of heterogeneous air-fuel mixture compression ignition anatomy together with the high density by volume and by mass that made us so dependent and addicted to diesel engines. In fact, everything you see around me in this room, in this space, was made possible by diesel engines. Let's start with the most obvious thing, the center of attention, this little diesel engine. It came to me from China, from the other part of the globe, and it was brought to one of the major European ports, probably by a container ship. And a container ship is powered by a large diesel engine. And then from the port, this little engine was brought to a warehouse by a large truck, which is of course powered by a diesel engine. But before that big truck could transport it to a warehouse, a road had to be built from the port to the city or the warehouse. This road was constructed by various road construction machines, all of which are powered by large diesel engines. But before this little engine could be shipped, it had to be made, of course. And as you can see, it's made from metal. And the ore for that metal had to be mined. And this mining was done by large machines powered by diesel engines. To be able to present this engine to you, I had to put it on a table. And this table is made from wood. And to make the table, trees had to be cut down. And they were cut down by large forestry machinery powered by diesel engines. Before I could make this video, I had to get breakfast so that I can think straight. And the food for my breakfast has been harvested by a large agricultural machinery, which is also powered by diesel engines. This room I'm sitting in this building had to be constructed. The materials had to be brought on site and turned into a building, all of which again was done by machinery and vehicles powered by diesel engines. Compared to all of this, fancy gasoline engines, they do nothing. They merely haul around screens, LED lights, and human blubber. They can't do any serious work because number one, gasoline is less energy dense than diesel, but that's the least of our problems because the difference is small. A much bigger problem is that getting gasoline requires more refining effort, leading to a higher base production cost. And if you want to do a lot of work, you need a lot of fuel. So if that fuel costs more, it's a big problem. And gasoline engines, as we have seen, they have a higher fuel thirst, they're not as efficient, they're not as strong, not as robust, and not as long-lived as diesels, which makes them, again, less suitable for work and leading to the ultimate fact that diesel gives a much better working bang for buck compared to gasoline engines, which is why gasoline engines will never replace diesels. And that's really no news, we already knew that. But even if gasoline could replace diesel, it would still not address the elephant in the room: emissions. Of course, modern diesel engines have acronyms like EGR and DPF and SCR to make them cleaner, but even an entire alphabet soup couldn't make a combustion engine truly and completely clean. So, let's try something else. Let's try something that can give us zero tailpipe emissions: electric motors and batteries. You see, electric motors are great. They can provide maximum torque at minimal RPM. On top of this, they're reliable, robust, proven technology, which means that they have told you, a lot of torque. Which means they meet all the conditions for giving us a lot of work. Unfortunately, there's a problem. If electric motors want to be on mobile vehicles, then they have to have batteries. And as we know, the energy density of batteries sucks. If we convert battery specs from watt-hours to megajoules, we get that a modern lithium-ion battery, as found in a battery electric vehicle, typically delivers around 0.9 megajoules per kilogram or 2.5 megajoules per liter. Recharging such an excavator or any other electrified large diesel vehicle would probably take something like 8 hours and would require a megawatt-scale infrastructure. Such an infrastructure, of course, is impossible in remote areas where many of these vehicles operate. But even if we had megawatt-scale infrastructure everywhere, 8 hours of recharging after 8 hours of work is simply unacceptable in industrial scenarios. Most excavators, for example, they work pretty much non-stop, shift after shift, and then they just spend like 20 minutes refueling after 2 or 3 shifts. The other problem with industrial applications is that they require high power draw, deep discharge, and often there's extreme temperatures, which means that batteries in industrial scenarios might last 3 or 5 years before a significant capacity loss. Compared to this, a diesel typically lasts 8 to 10 years, and then it can be rebuilt, unlike a battery pack. Okay, so big diesel stuff is not getting electrified anytime soon. Let's try something else, another popular fuel of the future: hydrogen. Now, hydrogen has something really cool up its sleeve, a diesel-beating energy density number of 120 megajoules per kilogram. That's almost 3 times better than diesel, while also giving us zero tailpipe emissions. Amazing, isn't it? Well, yes it is, but there's a catch. At anything above minus 253 degrees Celsius, hydrogen is a gas. And as a gas, it has pathetic density, which means that it has an energy density by volume of 0.01 megajoules per liter. So it's almost 3 times better by mass compared to diesel, but it's also 3,000 times worse by volume. But we can do something about that. If density is poor, why don't we stuff more hydrogen within the same volume? We can do that by compressing hydrogen to, let's say, 700 bar. If we compress it to 700 bar, we're going to raise the energy density of hydrogen by volume to 5.6 megajoules per liter. Now it's only 6 times worse than diesel. If we need 25 liters of diesel per hour and we have 8 hours to a shift, then we need 7,540 megajoules of energy to complete a shift. A 500-liter tank of diesel contains 18,850 megajoules of energy, which means that it can complete 2.5 shifts before needing to refuel. In order to complete just one 8-hour shift, we need a 1,346-liter hydrogen tank. That's more than twice the size of a diesel tank. And remember, this is not just a simple tank. It's a tank that needs to be capable of safely holding 700 bars of pressure without exploding. So what we actually need is a massive, thick-walled, heavy fuel tank. The hydrogen tank is actually just the beginning of our problems. Hydrogen is currently noticeably more expensive than diesel because its production is energy intensive, and then further energy must be spent to compress it to 700 bar. Hydrogen is also unsuitable for compression ignition. It must be spark ignited, which means that we can kiss our beautiful torque-rich compression ignition engine anatomy goodbye, and we must build something similar to a gasoline engine in order to run hydrogen. And as we have just seen, gasoline engines are pretty unsuitable for heavy-duty work. Okay, so hydrogen and batteries are a bust. Let's try something less ambitious. Instead of trying to get 0 emissions, let's try to get just less emissions. And let's try to do it with CNG and LPG. They are still mostly fossil-based, but they promise noticeably improved emissions compared to conventional diesel, and as a nice bonus, they're also cheaper. What are the downsides? Well, the first one is that both are slightly less energy dense, so we get a bit less fuel economy. Another problem is that storage and transport is more problematic, especially in the case of CNG, which is a bit like hydrogen in that it needs heavy reinforced tanks and high pressure compression. The benefit of CNG being that it's more sustainable for non-fossil renewable production from organic waste or landfill gas capture. The final problem is that neither CNG nor LPG are suitable for compression ignition, which means that again we would have to switch to a spark ignition anatomy or use a small amount of diesel as a pilot fuel to start the ignition process and then ignite the rest of the cylinder, which would be filled with either CNG or LPG. This leads to a dual fuel engine, which does complicate things, but at least in theory it should be feasible for many applications. But ultimately, both CNG and LPG are fossil fuels, and current renewable and sustainable sources are barely capable of meeting the demand that we have right now, let alone a dramatically increased one. If we switched all the big diesel stuff to CNG and LPG, demand would rise dramatically, and renewable sources couldn't meet even a fraction of that demand. And being a fossil fuel, it means that both of these fuels have strong geopolitical implications, especially LPG. And so for many countries, switching from petrol diesel to these two fossil fuels would just mean switching their dependence from one region to another. So yes, there is potential for reduced emissions, but ultimately both of these are a very much incomplete solution. Okay. Let's have one more shot. Let's try one more thing. Biodiesel. Now, biodiesel is like diesel, but it's bio. So you can type it like this and add a little green leaf and everybody's happy. The good thing is that it is diesel. It's just not made from oil reserves down in the planet Earth. It's made from vegetable oil, animal fat, used cooking oil, recycled grease. You can make it from all sorts of stuff. But as I said, it's diesel, so we can retain our beautiful torque-rich compression ignition anatomy. There are some downsides though. The first one is that biodiesel is about 10% less energy dense compared to conventional diesel, but that's honestly a minor problem compared to the impracticalities of hydrogen and batteries and LPG and CNG. The other problem is that cold weather performance of biodiesel is worse than regular diesel because biodiesel gels more easily, but we can solve this by blending biodiesel with regular diesel. However, blending also has limits. Current engines are unable to use B100, which is 100% biodiesel. They have to be modified to use pure biodiesel, but blends of B20 and below can be used by pretty much all diesel engines out there without any major issues. So all of these seem like relatively small problems. So we can over time just switch slowly, we can modify existing engines, make new ones differently, and then we're going to just move everything to biodiesel. Of course, the global demand for diesel is absolutely insane. And to meet that demand, we're going to have to repurpose some of our food production into production of plants for biodiesel. That's going to increase the price of our food a lot, but it's going to reduce our carbon footprint because plants, when they're alive, they absorb CO2. So that should offset all the CO2 that's going to be emitted when the biodiesel is burned. But again, the demand is so much that we have to also make our food at the same time. So we're going to have to clear a lot of the forests, pretty much all of them, so we can plant more stuff, so we can make more biodiesel. Yeah. As you can see, what we're doing with biodiesel is we're not solving problems, we're just shifting them elsewhere. And this is why biodiesel is not a complete solution. The best we can do with it is to blend it at low percentages with regular diesel to sort of offset some of the issues we have. Just like LNG and CNG, LPG and CNG, it is a very much incomplete solution. According to most estimates, we have around 40 to 60 years of oil reserves left. Of course, discoveries of new reserves, as well as the electrification of the entire passenger fleet of the world, might extend that deadline, but apparently there's a deadline. And the scary thing is that right now, all we have are impractical zero emissions dreams or incomplete reduced emissions realities which are unable to meet increased demand. What's also interesting is that most sources predict that the global population is going to start slowly decreasing right around when we run out of oil reserves, which sort of might help us because it might make some alternatives a bit more viable and we might need to rely on diesels less. But of course, making predictions about the distant future is about as reliable as, I don't know, a KTM camshaft. So what's the point of this video? Well, there are 3 points. The first thing I wanted to do is to just demonstrate the incredible capabilities of this ancient but still absolutely vital technology. It's very unsurprising that we got addicted to it because it's incredibly convenient, incredibly powerful, incredibly long-lived, robust, reliable, torque-rich, you name it. Diesel has everything to do all the work. So it's no wonder that we used it to build our world and that we are still using it to pump the lifeblood through the veins of our civilization. The second point that I want to make is that I believe that the aggressive talk and policies that are trying to decarbonize the passenger sector are a bit silly. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but I'm saying that focusing so much on the passenger sector, while being very lenient towards the gigantic sectors of international and domestic freight and shipping, mining, agriculture, forestry, construction, military, you name it. Being lenient towards that and focusing on this doesn't make sense because all of these other industrial sectors combined probably far outweigh the emissions from the passenger sector. And I can't give you numbers because numbers are so all over the place because different institutions in different countries report things differently. Some of it is just obviously horribly underreported. The rest of it is confidential, like in the case of military. The numbers vary so much that it's hilarious, and there's no single number. It's impossible to get to them. Honestly, I think a part of it is done on purpose. But if we want the clean and sustainable future that everybody's talking so much about, then it has to be a collective effort. Everybody has to pitch in, otherwise it's just empty talk. The final point I want to make is that we came up with the diesel engine, didn't we? Actually, we didn't. Rudolf Diesel came up with the diesel engine. Let's not appropriate the achievements of others. We got this far, didn't we? As a species, we got this far. And I think that finding excuses for why something can't be done is never going to get us any further, which means that this video doesn't have a point because it's just a bunch of excuses of why we can't get rid of the diesel engine. Let's end differently. Let's end on a high note. I genuinely believe in the creativity of humanity. We live in complex times and therefore they are going to require complex solutions. Diesel is amazing, but we will have to find alternatives. Maybe we can hybridize some of it. Maybe we can electrify the small stuff, modify the rest, use alternative fuels where applicable in which regions, and so on and so forth. We will have to be creative, but I think we can do it. Because if we want to meet the global demand, the gigantic global demand, while also reducing our emissions, we are going to need every tool in our toolbox. That's good, that's good. Sounds positive, but it's also vague and useless without any concrete steps. I should go into politics. As always, thanks a lot for watching. I'll be seeing you soon with more fun and useful stuff on the D4A channel.